Hello. Hopefully people can see and hear me. I've got an eye on the theater, so give me a hello. Give me a holler. Oh, I see. I've made the classic mistake of not muting my own theater tab, and so I know exactly how long the delay is. Welcome to Roguelike Celebrations preview event. We're super happy you made it. We really appreciate you coming out, especially for, a chance for us to test the social space, find the bugs, squish the bugs ahead of the main event, and also just get to hang out, spend some time with some of our favorite people. So, thank you so much for showing up, and we're going to have a fun, chill time this evening or morning or whatever time it is where you are. So, this year we're going to have some new stuff. People might remember we did a preview event a couple years ago to try out the space for the first time. And that time we had, speakers give a little extra preview of what they were going to talk about. This time we have completely different speakers. We're going to be doing fireside chats in a little bit with Casey Yano from Megacrit of Slay the Spire fame, and then with both Justin Mott and Matthew Davis from Subset Games of FTL and Into the Breach fame, which I am very excited about. Going to be keeping things pretty casual, but we will be taking questions. So hopefully, if you're listening to this, you are maybe in our social space. If you're watching this on YouTube or Twitch and you're wondering what I'm talking about, go check out roguelike.club. Get like a free Eventbrite ticket. We have our own custom mud-like explorable social space where you can do things like chat and ask questions. It's where we do our own moderation. Give it a try. And then once you're in the theater, there's a button down below the video chat where you can ask a question. So go ahead and put questions and topics there. You can also upvote what other people have written, and I'll be keeping an eye on that while we do the fireside chats. If you have any problems with the experience, the mud, or any other kind of things going on in the space, feel free to either type /mod to get in touch with a moderator, or if you keep an eye on the name badges, there's a little SOS badge next to anyone that's a moderator. So, talk to anyone if you have trouble. We have links to our code of conduct on the side if you haven't gotten a chance to read that. Be super great. And yeah, this is a space made by volunteers. We're all just volunteers on the committee. So we are doing this partly because we know that there are probably some issues to find. And also we're just interested to hear any kind of comments and feedback on what you think of the space. So if you have notes to leave, inside of the central hall, there is a note wall for leaving feedback or bug reports. Go ahead and check that out. Let us know, good things, bad things, anything like that. Gives us a little bit of time to address it before the main event. So, that's a lot of the big spiel. And you might see sometimes, like we just had a live update where we are able to push updates to the social space if need be. So if that happens, then you'll get a kind of pop up and refresh. And generally, if you have problems with the social space, a lot of them are fixed with a refresh because that's how computers tend to go. So if you run into problems, that's the first thing to try. If it doesn't work, reach out to moderators. That's a lot of this. I can see people hanging out in the chat. I can see that the theater is happening, and hopefully people will be using this question wall, which I see they already have been. Thank you, Dexter. So I think that there's probably no reason why we can't just get started. I think we can welcome our first guest.
Oh,
Tracy.
Oh, hi. Hello.
Thanks for coming to our little preview event.
Yeah, how's it going?
It's pretty good. It's fun. We haven't done this format before, so I think it's going to be a fun time. And like I introduced, co-founder of Megacrit Games, co-creator of Slay the Spire. You do a lot of the UX production and creative direction kind of work. And I guess just to start out, like, you want to introduce yourself a bit, talk about maybe your role in Slay the Spire?
Yeah, sure. Hi, I'm Casey Yano, one of the two co-founders of Megacrit Games. I think the first game we published was, I guess, the first and only game we've published so far is Slay the Spire. We're working on another thing right now, but we do a little bit of everything, but I do mostly game client programming, art direction. I draw some assets as well. mainly I draw all the UI, at least for Spire, and then I don't know. I have a lot of hats. Trying to remember them all.
Yeah.
Right.
I know you said something
Announcements.
really interesting when we talked earlier, which was that Anthony was kind of the card game guy and you were kind of the roguelike guy.
Yeah.
And I would love to expand on what you mean and how that breakdown kind of worked.
I see. Let's see. I think when initially, so Anthony and I used to work together on games a long, long time ago. During like college, and he was always into like board games and card games. He had he ran was like working and managing a local game store. It was like really into board games in general. Just he just always did board games. And I did a lot of game testing growing up. That was like my job as well. So we both
fun.
had like kind of like game adjacent jobs. But I was always into more action games than like board games and card games. I just played a lot of like smaller indie titles. I was really into Geometry Wars 2 for a bit. I kind of like the idea of like not memorizing a level. The first game we made together, which was not Megacrit technically, it was a different company we had at the time called Pew Pew Inc. And we made a game called Godlazer, which was like this Ikaruga clone. And the pretty much what I thought would be groundbreaking at the time was like instead of spawning enemies from like predetermined locations, we'd be like, oh, maybe it will spawn from like here, maybe it'll spawn from there, or like the bosses would like randomize which order they'll do their like bullet patterns and stuff like that. So I guess in a way, I was always interested in just like creating things spontaneously.
Yeah.
And at the time, there wasn't like a big like word or movement around it. This was back in 2009 or so, maybe before.
Okay. So maybe pre some of the like bigger boom of the action-y roguelikes.
Yeah, this was around, and then like a few years, I guess around that time was maybe when The Binding of Isaac was released, and it was kind of like this big like rogue light kind of movement kind of started. I was also a big fan of Splunky. I would say like huge inspiration from like Derek Yu in general, just because one of the very few people who was like blogging about like independent game development. You know, indies on even on Steam were like pretty rare at the time.
Yeah. Interesting. Which then it's fascinating given all of that then like Slay the Spire, one of I think the really definitive now card game based roguelikes that I think has even I feel caused a renaissance or at least like a boost. I feel like there's been a lot of card game roguelikes coming out, especially I feel like about the dev lag of like if you started making your card based roguelike when you played Slay the Spire, you've been coming out in the last little while.
There are a lot of card games now, aren't there?
Yeah.
So I saw Anthony saw an opportunity for deck building games to be done in like a virtual kind of like video games, and I thought that digital card games, the UI of digital card games was really awful. Like cards would just be these static things, and you would click on it, and then you click on some area to like play it. You'd like have a hard time reading it, so you'd only be able to play on PC. But then like Hearthstone came along, and it was like, hey, like it can feel sort of like fun to play with cards, even if you're not like handling them in real life. It shouldn't feel like this like sad secondary mode of play where it's like, oh, it's like not as good as a real thing. And I was like, it can be better than the real thing.
Yeah.
Because you can explain rules dynamically in context.
Right.
We can shuffle for you. We can clarify rules by enforcing them through game system mechanics, just by programming them. And so I really wanted to like push that as far as possible, while also making sure that like Anthony wanted to make a deck building game, and I was like, oh, this makes sense. I played a little bit of I think everyone at the time has played a little bit of Dominion, and then there was like a spin-off game that was pretty popular called Ascension, I think, and that was like another Dominion like kind of like drafting deck building game. So
right.
I did both of those as well.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting of the taking advantage of. I remember what I found really cool about Hearthstone, and then is true in Slay the Spire, is all that stuff of you can do strange things to the deck that would be tedious or impossible in a physical board game, or like the level of token management, or something like add damage for every other strike card in your deck is a very that would be quite a difficult thing to handle. And yeah, which I think that the roguelikeness of the systemic kind of combinations as well of how especially the relics come into it, which I was actually curious if relics fell more on your side or Anthony's side or a mix, because I feel like they're a very roguelike-y thing almost more than a card gamey thing. Not that I think everything splits into these two categories, but it's interesting to think about.
We used to have more traditional rogue like elements. Actually, we used to have potions that were unidentified, and you had to use them and figure out what they were.
What?
You could combine potions, but the potion drops were not very high, just because there's a lot of monsters and there's already a lot of items on screen. So we ended up kind of making it simple. Relics used to have 3 slots. And you would choose 3 powerful ones, and you can mix and match what you want. But we kind of had more fun just designing too many of them, and we were like, well, if you have too many and we have to choose between them, it feels bad to get rid of when you have too many excess relics. You don't want to get rid of them. And we're like, why don't we just do what the Binding of Isaac does? And it's just it just kind of descends into chaos, and more and more items can trigger off other items, and it's just kind of these cascading event stuff. And that was more of a hit internally when we were playtesting, because we had a internal playtest period of more than a year, I think.
Yeah, I remember actually a GDC talk that I went to about some of the data gathering and things like that informed development, which was really cool. Was the potion identifying something that also made it out into more closed or beta type playtesting?
It didn't last very long.
Okay. Because that's fascinating. I've never heard before that there was potion identification in Slay the Spire. That would have really cut through the is it a roguelike?
I'm not really sure why we added some of these mechanics or when. It's all a bit of a blur. We're like, is there enough complexity? Why don't we try adding? And there was a lot of try adding kind of mechanics. And some of them ended up very well, some of them not as well. Another one would be maps. We didn't used to have a map. It used to just be you just be shown 3 doors, and then how the door was ornamented, you would know kind of what room you would be in next, which is
kind of how Hades does it.
What?
I think that's how Hades does it now, kind of where you see yeah, you have 3 doors and they have a little icon of what's going to be in them.
It's pretty interesting that Hades ended up kind of using a similar system that we had. Why we got rid of it, I don't know. I think we just wanted to be able to feel like you were traversing. And in a game that's mainly static, it's really hard to kind of convey that feeling. Whereas in Hades, you're literally physically moving around. So even if you don't have a map, and even then, I guess Supergiant's game also has a map, right? When you beat a boss, your character goes doo, 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 and you
oh yeah. Which actually always kind of reminds me of the between acts ish some of the Slay the Spire map stuff.
There's a good feeling of movement in Hades for sure. Better than Slay the Spire, actually. But
it is interesting because I think again in terms of roguelikeness, that kind of dungeon dive feel, it does make sense that that's much harder in a card game because there isn't a movement stage, which I feel I've seen some games now that are trying to do more of a you run around and also play cards, which
a little bit of both.
Yeah. But that is interesting. And it's interesting you mentioned the map, because I feel my observation is that I have now seen other games with maps that I feel look very like Slay the Spire's map, which again, FTL's planet map, also kind of similar. So it's not no one's ever done it, but it seems that's another little lesson that people have taken from it and applied.
Yeah. I would say the map is mostly evolutionary. It wasn't created in a vacuum. I don't remember exactly which games we looked at. We actually looked at a handful of different games when thinking about specifically events, the map system, and the enemy's move system. So those 3, we kind of studied different games to see what they did before we landed on exactly what we wanted to do. It wasn't something we wrote in a design document at the very beginning. I think the design document was 2 pages, very short. It was deck building, classes,
Yeah.
monsters, yeah, like that.
Uh-huh.
We figured out like the pacing, the maps, potions, relics, the different types of nodes in those maps. Those were all kind of created organically while we were building it.
Which is really interesting. Like I don't know what level of trying to rack your brain is useful, but like from a programming, almost like a technical standpoint, like that's a lot of flexibility of like iterating on all these different concepts. Were there any particular approaches that helped make that possible, that you could, add and remove stuff that fast when you were prototyping?
That's a good question. I just kind of write shitty code. I just don't, I'm just not afraid of like
It's
losing
honest.
anything that I write. I
Yeah.
just write just crap. Nothing is like reliant on something else. And if something is, I just remove it and then I just fix all the bugs. I'm just kind of chaotic in terms of programming. It's not really recommended for teams that are larger than 2 people, I would say. But so it worked for us, I guess. So a lot of those systems, like they came and went in less than a week.
Wow.
We converted we had like a move system where the enemies describe what they did, and then they had a series of actions. But then we made it so that we got little icons above the enemies. Like that took about a week, which is, I guess, pretty long. That was probably the biggest overhaul.
Hmm.
Writing a map, we just, we're like, let's use this algorithm. And then we like put something up there and it's just like an image with a few like tick boxes. And while it was kind of crappy at the start, we would still iterate over a long period of time. It's like, oh, maybe we should have 5 branches at the start or like 4 branches. Maybe instead of 17 floors, we should go down to 16 floors. And eventually it became 13 floors. Just one at a time, just shorter and shorter. We're like, kind of getting tired of playing Act 1 over and over again.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Yeah, which is really interesting. Was there like a cadence to like, okay, we put in a bunch of features, we've written a bunch of shitty code, let's like take a little bit to get the code less shitty? Or was it just kind of ad hoc, like always balancing the two? Or was there a moment at the end where you were like, oh no?
when you write a lot of bad code, sometimes when you're making content in that system, you're like, this isn't gonna work. I guess we'll take a little bit of time to actually fix the code. So there are like kind of fix things as we run into them. And I think you just want to make sure that you have like really well written functions, and those kind of like methods are just like named after the actual game things. So it's like, oh, this is like an elite room. You're like, oh, this is a room where elites are.
Yeah.
We try not to name things like, strong monster, Q attach your bootstrapper, and you're like, okay, we don't know what that means anymore.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's one thing I noticed when I did some stuff in the NetHack code. I was impressed. They do the terrible thing of the time because of screen space that they drop like all the vowels from all variable names for space. But other than that, function names and stuff tend to be really descriptive of what they do in a way that makes the code more readable. So that is really interesting. There's one question from Travis of like all these different kind of trying it out things. Like how long would you try and iterate on a feature and kind of like give it a go before deciding either, okay, we're going to codify this, we're going with it, or we're dropping it?
We would just play one run, and I think and if it doesn't feel like it's going to work, we just kind of axe it. We don't like
Wow.
leave it in there for months.
How do you get that decisive?
When you like paint something and you're like, does this look good? And then the next day you look at it and you're like, nah. It's kind of like that kind of like guttural feeling. Not guttural, gut feeling, excuse me. And we're like, it doesn't work.
Wow.
And Anthony and I are really harsh like editors against each other. We'd be like, hey, like this system might work. And I'd be like, I don't think so. I think it's gonna suck. And you're like, well, we should just try it. And I was like, all right, well, I'm gonna write it shitty. And then I just throw it in there, and we have an enemy that like eats your cards, or like, suddenly your character grows horns. And I was like, I don't think this is worth it. Or like maybe it's awesome and it stays.
Yeah, that's interesting. Do you think that's one where it helps that you've known each other for longer? That it's not like you're not you didn't just get together for the project and it's some random person telling you, I think your ideas aren't worth it.
Yeah, I guess that's a good point. Like Anthony and I have known each other for quite a long time. And we also have just played a lot of games together. And so when we kind of like critique games, we kind of already know what we're going to say. Like when we boot up a game and it's loud, we're Or like, why isn't the master at 50% when you launch the game? Like, why isn't the master and the background music and SFX at 50? Like, then you can go up or down. Like, why would you start at 100? Like, that's ridiculous. My ears are gonna die. It's like
Is that how you relax? You just bring up other things and critique. It's kind of like a Mystery Science Theater 3000, but just like on games for fun.
Yeah, I mean, to this day, we still play games, and we're like, this isn't gonna work. Or like, oh, this looks like it borrowed, idea from this game, or maybe this game is still the same in like the series. What's a good example? Let's see. I think Anthony wanted to try out Tiny Tina's Wonderlands. That's like the Borderlands spiritual sequel to 3 or something. And it's like, and I was like watching the trailer, and I was extremely skeptical. I was like, this is exactly like Borderlands, except like different classes. And they're like, I don't know, because when it's been a while since you've played a certain type of game, you're just like, this time it's gonna be different. He starts playing it, and I'm like, I knew it's the same game. I'm not joining you on this co-op game.
You're done. No,
Done.
not worth
I mean,
it.
if you've never played a Borderlands game, you can start there. It's still fun, sure. But
Yeah, they have 1 billion guns.
there's a lot of guns. The guns are very fun.
Yeah.
Their writing is, if that's your style, that's cool.
Yeah. Almost speaking of fun guns, not exactly. We have a question from one classy dude. Some people have upvoted. Do you have a favorite card or any particular memorable like discoveries in the game from you as a developer or people playing where it's like, oh, I didn't expect this combo would happen? And like, can you boil it down to a favorite card?
Oh, boiling it down to a favorite card. Let's see. I like wacky cards, but I also am just like a really big fan of cards that have like a specific purpose and are clean. My favorite card is Bash, by the way.
Okay.
It's very pure, because if you play a Bash, the next turn you play 2 strikes and it's worth it. It's worth the cost of the Bash. You do a little bit more damage. It's so elegant. And it's a starter card, so like the starter cards have to be like on point.
Right.
Otherwise, it's like, oh, this is the card I'm going to remove immediately when I start playing. Or it's the card I'm always going to upgrade. Like, you have to have it like just right for that one card that is not the strikes and defense. And so I would say,
I feel like this must be key because I play a lot of Slay the Spire and I've gotten way further in Ascension in every class except Ironclad, and I also almost always like get rid of Bash from my deck. So I'm learning. Yeah, I'm throwing out Casiano's favorite card every time.
It doesn't mean that it is the strongest. Some cards upgrade substantially well than they should.
Well, I don't do great at Ironclad comparatively, so I think more I have something to learn. Do you have any favorite cards that got cut, or like favorite things from all those like give it a try?
It's hard for me to know what I have added or haven't added, just because I worked on other card games as well. So I forget which game is which at this point. It's kind of just like, and also we cut more than half the cards that we make.
Oh, wow.
Because cards are just really easy to make. You're like, it does this and this and this, except for the super complex ones. But generally, it's like, let's just try adding a bunch of like vanilla and French vanilla cards. That's just like things that are very pure and things that are slightly impure. And then like, we want to make sure there's some cards that are like weird.
Yeah.
But if you have too much weird things, then you're like kind of like overthinking every turn. And then it's like, it's kind of like really thinky to play. So you don't get in a good flow state. So you kind of have to balance it out. I forgot the question. Kind of went into my own.
I mean, and I want to note, so French vanilla is a term for like, it's pretty basic, but it's a little bit special.
That's what Anthony tells me.
I
He's
like
into
that.
Magic. So he tells me French vanilla cards are like cards that are like very basic, but a little bit different.
Fascinating.
I've never word or something.
I've never heard that before, and I want to steal it. That's new.
That's fine because I stole it.
Yeah, it's just a chain. Who knows who Anthony stole it from?
I mean,
it probably goes back to Rome. Yeah.
I'm not a card game person. I mean, I'm a little bit of a card game person now, but like compared to Anthony,
Yeah. Slay the Spire dev, not a card game person.
Not a card game person. That's sort of my tagline whenever somebody's like, "How did you think of this game?" And I'm like, "I didn't."
Amazing. I was so glad that like I got that heads up early. I was like, well, all the questions about card games, delete. No.
I mean, you can ask me, but like, I still make a lot of content. I love making content, even in card games.
Yeah.
I think seeing the foundation of like a game and then making content that fits into it is very, it's just a very good design exercise, whether you are into that genre or not, right?
Yeah.
Like you're playing a game, Slay the Spire, and you're like, I wish I could do X, Y, Z. And then you're like, oh, how do I work backwards to make sure this unusual strategy will work out? Something that didn't work out here is like what if we could have a character who thrives on having low HP? So there's
Right.
cards that are like, oh, like if your HP is less than half, this card is stronger or something like that. It's like a very pure, like berserker type build archetype that you would see in all sorts of games. Didn't really work for Slay the Spire. We have some like remnants of that kind of archetype in there a little bit, but
Yeah.
you're kind of towing the line a little too much.
Is that kind of, and because I feel like this applies to card games, but would apply to other games as well in terms of that, like content versus rules of, do you go back and forth, or do you find one works better than the other in terms of saying like, I want to try and have a character build that is thriving on having low health, and so I'm going to make content for that, versus I've come up with a piece of content of like, what if I had this bonus if my health was below half? Oh, cool. Like now let's try and build this back into a bigger feature. Like which direction?
I see. Yeah, I think I sort of start at the goal because then it's a little more clear to like shape and form something that'll have the player kind of funnel into that kind of idea. And then players get kind of that aha moment, like, oh, like this is a possible strategy. Like, oh, we have this very unusual relic that you can like play status cards from your hand. And then we have another relic that's like, if you play 5 cards, it deals 3 damage to all enemies or something like that. And it's like, oh, this is a very strange combination, but it can happen in a very, very rare case. And whenever we make something, we make sure that those cases might happen. And if they have no interesting interaction, we're like, why are we forcing the player to play in a way that is not very interesting? And so, no matter how good something is, if it's a little boring or doesn't work with anything, we want to get rid of it.
Yeah. How do you keep track of that? Do you just have like your big Rolodex of all cards and relics and everything, and you just stare at it all until you're like, yes, I see this combination?
We play 2 or 3 runs a week. We just play a lot. Because if you play a game a lot, you kind of start having this like next level conversation of like, instead of talking about the mechanics, you start talking about the possibility space. And when you talk about the possibility space, and you're also the developer of that game, then you can make those possibility spaces come true. And I think that's extremely important.
Yeah.
Maybe in a bigger production where someone's like a designer and someone's like the person implementing it and someone's the person testing it, it's like, how does it all come full circle so that you can make more and more interesting little like, I like to call them moments of delight. So we want to have moments of delight happening, just want to spark joy, right?
Yeah.
So,
the Marie Kondo method of game development.
It kind of is like that, yeah. I think about Super Smash Brothers a lot because it's like a series of systems where like chaos can happen. In the same way that's sort of what roguelikes are about, I think, is like you have all these levers that are chaotic, and then sometimes something very unusual can happen. Like maybe you're gonna lay an egg, and then for some reason you're a robot. So like it's like what happens to the egg? Like what's gonna be born out of the egg? You're a robot. Like I don't get it. But sometimes the developer didn't account for it, and you get a robot dragon. Like who knows? Whatever.
Just like in Super Smash Brothers.
Just like in Super Smash Brothers, where you just throw out a few hitboxes and you tech off the wall, and who knows? Maybe you're gonna land in a weird way. Maybe you're gonna win.
Yeah. No, I think that's really interesting, and I like how much you're mentioning, because I was curious like what types of games act as inspiration for you, and even like outside of games, like sources of inspiration. Like, is it mostly coming from games and game stuff, or is there anything outside of games that you feel like you kind of bring into work?
Outside of games, I mean, at the time, my main hobbies were always, I guess it still is just climbing and cooking. Do a lot of climbing and cooking. I like climbing a lot because you sort of make incremental progress, and then when you climb stuff, the routes that are set are changed by setters. if you climb outside, obviously the rocks aren't changed. But indoor climbing, there are people who are literally like level designers. They're just trying to make all sorts of like weird like combinations of like holds so you can climb in a fun way. And they're like color coded. They're trying to have good UX so you don't like fall onto another person. Um, so I would say I'm always thinking about like design and why something is more satisfying or not satisfying. Because even in like climbing, you can just have like one move to like climb something, and you're like, yeah. It's like, wait, that's not very satisfying. That's just like a luck based weird jump that I have to do. Or it can be like a really long, grueling cardio thing, and you're like, okay, maybe I needed that for my exercise.
Yeah.
They all have different goals in mind, I think.
That was really interesting. And I love especially seeing it as a UX thing, which I have heard as well. I have not done a lot of rock climbing, but I think one of the things I've heard multiple people say is that like UX element of there is kind of this readability to it in its own language, which I think is cool. Because I think like, different games get their own languages and different genres, but I think that Slay the Spire has a very like specific and consistent language in terms of how it gets across effects. And yeah, like card games wise, like I love that about digital card games. If I have mostly a hard time memorizing a whole bunch of different effects and things like that, and so the ability to hover over and just like get those reminders whenever you need them is fantastic.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That's my proudest thing is just having tips.
Yeah.
We used to have a timer which made it show up after a second because we thought it might be annoying. But then it was more annoying to wait because we have bad memory. We're like, What does it do? I have to wait a whole second to find out.
Right. So. Yeah. Do you think that there's anything else that other developers and roguelikes and things like that could maybe be learning from in Slay the Spire, or be taking kind of things you love? Like I mentioned, I think we see a lot of card game stuff. I think that the map, I see versions that look to me like they were inspired even more. But is there anything else that sometimes you're playing other games out there, and even games maybe from people who are like, we love Slay the Spire? You're like, oh, I wish more people would be learning this thing that we did really well.
I see. I think there just needs to be more stuff. That's how I feel. I like content-dense games in general, just because all sorts of unusual situations can happen. And I feel like you kind of have to hit like a tipping point of like content, and then the game becomes sort of unpredictable, even to the developer. And I remember hitting that tipping point, and Anthony and I would be like, "We're gonna play the game. Like, I wonder what kind of build we're gonna get." When that language starts showing up organically, I think that's sort of like you just started hitting that tipping point of adding content into your game. And I feel like a lot of games that I play right now, kind of like, especially roguelites, release into early access before hitting that tipping point. And you know that because if you play a game and you're like, I'm going to do a spear build. And if you're going to do a spear build, that means the game isn't chaotic enough to be like, hey, like maybe we're kind of accidentally guiding you into like a punchy build. But it's like, if everyone's like, oh, I'm always going to go do XYZ build, that means, there's probably not enough randomization.
Yeah.
So that's my, I don't even know if it's good advice. That's my advice for roguelike games right now.
I think it's interesting. I feel like it combines to me with what we talked about a lot of like the way that you have that decisiveness and kind of cutting things down. Because I think that that's the avoiding of like the oatmeal-y problem of, I think, you can have lots of stuff, but it all needs to be at a level of like quality and working. If you have lots of stuff, but then too much of it is, not as interesting. But I think that my guess, from just having this conversation is that I see a lot of combination between those ideas of like the way that you cut things down so much, but then you can build up like tons of stuff. So you get this like high quality bar of everything that's in there is really good, and there's lots of it.
Yeah. I would say make stuff, cut stuff, and have fun. Gotta play your game. Gotta play your games. Everyone's gotta play their games.
Play games. I like, what is it? Make stuff, cut stuff. What was the last one?
Cut stuff. Play stuff.
Play stuff?
Test stuff. I don't know.
Test stuff. Enjoy stuff. Excellent. Well, thank you so much. That time went by very quickly, to me at least. Hopefully to everyone else.
It's great talking.
yeah.
If there's any follow-up questions,
Yeah,
always
and
on the
so
internet. Kind of a problem, but it's the pandemic, so
yeah,
one will
yeah.
not.
And if you are in the social space, Casey, we have the which is the room assignment. Kawa, you're in the back end. What's the room assignment? Is it in my notes? It is in my notes. It's mage. So if you're around, or if other people are around that want to, like, after the subset games talk, want to just like hang out and talk Slay the Spire, we have from the theater the mage breakout room. That's the kind of like loosely assigned one for this. So if you're around, Casey, and want to hang out in ASCII space with us, then cool.
I'll
But
try
if
to
not,
find it and hang out a little bit.
okay, sounds great. Awesome. Well, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Cool. All right. Excellent. So, well, that was super fun. I hope everyone had as much fun as me. I could have done that for a long time. So I think that, reminders for people, if you're listening to this on Twitch or on YouTube and you're wondering where you can do things like leave questions and talk to people, go to roguelike.club. We have a custom social space that we're hanging out in. You can still get a free ticket on Eventbrite and join us. That'd be great. If you are in the space and you have questions or problems, you can reach the mods with /mod. And if you have requests for changes, if you have feedback, if you have bug reports, in the central hall, there's a note wall where you can leave comments. We'd love that. And yeah, reminder again, if you have questions or topic suggestions, we have the Ask a Question button in the theater. I'm keeping an eye on that while I talk so that I can, grab comments as makes sense. And yeah, I'll do the quick pitch. Of course, this is a preview event for the main Roguelike Celebration event. We do have the tickets available for that now. We're going to have all kinds of great speakers. We have things like Dylan Gettig talking about how roguelike developers and streamers form the perfect ecosystem, which I think is appropriate because Slay the Spire has tons of streaming. We're going to have talks on games like Moria, Cataclysm, Sil Q, all kinds of deep cuts, and all kinds of great technical and like meaty conceptual talks. We've got things like constraint-based generation, causal graphs, expressive range analysis. It's going to be a good time. So go ahead and check that out. Grab a ticket so you don't forget. And if you want to keep up with what we're doing, we've got a Twitter and we have a YouTube channel where we obviously put up our videos as well as live stream this. So I think that's my in-between spiel, and we can move into the next fireside chat with Subset Games. Hi, Justin and Matthew.
Hello.
Hello.
Right.
You're doing a
Excellent.
terrible job and promoting us slightly too late.
You're doing it live.
Yeah.
Preview event passion. Excellent. Well, welcome to the preview event. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for
Thank
having
you for
us.
having us.
Yeah. And yeah, I mean, we can get right into it. I guess if you want to kind of introduce yourselves a bit, maybe Justin, you want to go first?
Sure, I'm Justin Ma. Matt and I made Subset Games about 10 years ago, when we started with FTL, and then our more recent game is Into the Breach. I do most of the art and half of the design.
Cool. And Matthew.
And I did all the programming up until relatively recently, and half the design work as well. We 2 or 3 years ago added our first full-time additional team member, Mauro, who is a better programmer than I, to fill in my gaps in terms of to port the game and the like.
Yeah. Excellent. Yeah, and so we've been getting some questions and some excitement from people ahead of time, and yeah, I mean, we can just dig in, I guess. So one question that someone asked that I actually found really interesting, and so we're getting into like just design meatiness right away, is Into the Breach. Part of what's really interesting is how much information the player has at all times. But the very first turn, when you're putting your mechs down, is when it feels like you don't know a lot. You don't know where kind of the Vec are going to come up. Was that kind of an intentional thing, or what was the thought in terms of like your very first turn Into the Breach? You have very little information, and then everything else feels like you know everything.
I think when you have a lot of information on that turn, or like pre-turn, what you're trying to do is guide or predict what the enemy is doing. So like Fire Emblem, you stand in a space to make someone else stand in a different space and attack. And so you have to you're trying to be guiding the AI. And you can do that in Into the Breach a little bit, but we really didn't want that to be the focus. We wanted the focus to be like, here is a puzzle that you can see right now. Do what you can with it. I don't know if it was a conscious decision, but I think it lined up with what we were trying to do. What about you, Matt?
Yeah, in that first pre-turn, the enemies aren't going to attack anything. You're not given any less information than you're given in any other turn. It's just kind of a fuzzy, weird place because you're in between turns. You never know in advance where the enemy is going to move and queue. That's kind of 2 turns in advance then. And so I think it came down to just always presenting the same information we've always presented. And the drop-in point, there's not much to tell. And I agree with Justin that obviously exploiting the AI, figuring out its patterns and trying to make them go places and do things is something I do when I play Into the Breach, and I expect players to do. But it was never intended as the focus, and you wouldn't want to put too much emphasis on that.
Right. Yeah. That's really interesting. Excellent. Such like on the ball questions for just immediately this like extremely specific design of like in one of your games on one specific part. Why'd you do it?
It is. It's a really common complaint though. And it's an interesting one to me because it's not something that's ever troubled me. I've seen a lot of forum posts and stuff of like, I don't even understand the strategy. Heck, I think when we were doing the port for the mobile version, we actually got a bug report queued from Netflix that a QA on the Netflix side said, this must be a bug. I don't know what the strategy is for deployment. There's no information here, and it seems like random chance. And I feel like there is enough there you can do with it in terms of setting up your melee mechs close and your range mechs far, staying out of range of scorpions, et cetera, to kind of prep for the future turns. But yeah, it does seem to be something that confuses people. I'm not sure what we could do to improve that.
Maybe we could have like let people know that like, if you stand far enough away from this guy, he won't web you,
Yeah.
Maybe.
But even then, like, I'm cool the enemies webbing me. I'd rather them web me than the buildings. So, yeah.
That's fascinating. Have there been any other cases like that in terms of like unexpected level of opinions as bugs or that kind of like reactions where you have to find that balance of do you stick to your design guns or do you say like, okay, fair point?
There's a lot of stuff that's just simply some people want to play a different game, and the game that they want to play would probably be fine, but it's just not necessarily what we want to make. So there's definitely some level of just, maybe this could have a happy middle ground, but it's kind of what we wanted to do, so sorry.
Or I also feel like sometimes it's a failure on our part to have the information ready for the player to understand what our intention was. Like in that drop-in case, like I guess we've done a bad job introducing drop-in and the elements available to the player when they're doing the drop-in. So it makes it feel like there's nothing going on there. And so that's kind of sometimes a failure on our side, not just a design difference.
Sure.
And I had something else that I've completely forgotten.
Is there ever a case where it's kind of a flip where you've gotten kind of feedback or seen people doing something while playtesting that made you realize like, hey, like there's something I can kind of take from that, or hey, this is working kind of even better than I thought, let me expand on it?
Yeah, I mean, all the time, but largely some of the biggest stuff we learned was just how little people understand something that we thought was pretty clear. And then we have to go and make it super, super clear and fix the UI and fix hide stuff or show stuff. And so getting people, it's hard when you know the game back and front, but like figuring out how to get the player to the point that we want them to, where you can actually start enjoying the game, was definitely hard and required watching a lot of people.
It was one that we were putting in front of like early friends and stuff, and Into the Breach was painful to watch early players play. They just didn't get it. It didn't make any sense. Like they didn't know what to expect from the game, what they're supposed to be doing in the game. And it wasn't a case of the design being bad. It was a case of the presentation being problematic. And stuff like the animated tooltips made a massive difference for the capacity for that. I think I caught the end of Casey's interview, and he was also talking a lot about UX and presentation and things. And it's stupid how much time we have to spend making games like Slay Spire or like Into the Breach. Half of it, maybe more. It feels like it's a UX challenge more than anything.
Yeah, which is interesting. I guess I'm curious how you approach the development process for that in terms of like, yeah, there's that you want to get feedback quick, but then without the, the level of presentation, it can be hard to get the feedback that you would get if the presentation was there. So was there a way that you dealt with that in terms of like, do you just front load the presentation, whether or not that's going to be a feature you keep, or?
Probably the opposite. I think we do the most hardcore serious game possible and then make it more approachable later. I think early on we largely just ask other developers and people who are very familiar with our work to play test the game, and they have the capacity, or they're pretty good at like picturing what it will look like in the end and just sort of giving us a lot of leeway. So
And
yeah,
not being as confused by those mechanics that might jump out or be strange to someone who didn't play as much or doesn't do as much development.
Yeah, cool.
But every single time I think we release, to go back to just on the subject of design differences when we release stuff, the community and the Reddit forums and the Discord always have issues with what we've done. And the recent one, or the one that comes up over and over because we keep changing it, is the weapon cost and power cost and store presentation and availability. And we made yet another change to that in this most recent update, and it had a lot of people unhappy with us. And in those cases, we have I've repeatedly explained our logic behind it, and we've stuck to our guns in terms of from our play testing, we liked it. But it's pretty rare that we hear anything that we're just like, nope, they're idiots, we're not going to listen to them. Every complaint is valid. It's just, is it a design issue? Is it a presentation issue? Is it where can we find the middle ground and make it work for everyone?
Yeah, makes a lot of sense. Looking at some of the audience questions, of which there are quite a few. One is like flipping back to FTL. Zerxon was asking, so FTL's inspired a lot of other indie space roguelikes. Are there any that you've had a chance to play and particularly enjoyed? Or do you make games so much you don't get time to play games?
Yeah, I mean, I try and touch on a lot of them, at least to check them out and see what's around. I can't remember the name. It was like Northern European and a whole bunch of letters. Is a word, like, but I don't remember what that word is. But there's no vowels in it. Anyways, there's been a couple. I don't know if Out There was inspired by FTL or not, but I really enjoyed Out There as well. Gosh, what was that game?
I'm trying to find it for you, Justin. I know the one you're talking about. It was fun. It was a good one. It was a good choice. It's a little bit older and was super interesting.
It was just all UI and just colored squares and rooms.
Yeah, it had a strong board gamey design. We probably shouldn't dive too much into that game, given that we can't even name it. But,
well, you should go play it. You should find it.
Yeah, the side tangent. I've been like trying to look at the theater chat with the delay. I'm like, quick, is anyone in the theater shouting?
I'm sure
like,
someone
please, it's this game. No one's got it yet. So
yeah, I play a lot of the games, but the one thing that I kind of
I got it.
Yeah,
it's Rhyme de Capsule. I'll toss in the chat. There we go.
Cool.
There we go.
Yeah, the one thing I haven't seen enough of that I want to see more is like actual crew and power management. I feel like is the one thing that like I thought was really maybe the coolest part of FTL. A lot of other people latch onto the stories and the text events and the random battles and all that sort of stuff. But I just want to see more micromanaging people to put out fires, like and like turning off oxygen or whatever, you know.
Yeah, the power element is one that you don't see very often. In general, though, I feel like I just want to see take some inspiration, but then also make something completely new that can surprise us and surprise more developers down the line. I heard you asked Casey a similar question. It's so hard to say, I like this element of my game, I think everyone should use it. I think that's it's hard to say that, but I think it would be cool to just see more innovation and like really, really aggressive twisting the concepts on people. Would be fun.
Yeah, like I know Sunless Seas was partially inspired by FTL, and that's like completely different. And I love that game. Yeah,
That's an excellent game. I put many hours into that.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'd forgotten about that. Yeah, it's hard to ask the question, what have you liked in the last 10 years?
Yeah.
Suddenly it all just falls out.
Yeah. Well, I find it interesting, even just between kind of the two major games, like we have FTL, which is closer to like it's real time with pause, which means that there is some time to like sit and think, but also you've got that kind of like I find the stressful level if you're trying to move people between and react to things. So it's like somewhere between action style, but then with pause. But then you got Into the Breach, which is this like turn-based chess of a game, which is very interesting to me because I feel like they're two very different games in a lot of ways. So I'm curious, what was it like going between almost, you've got like these like turn-based strategy roguelike and almost something somewhere between action roguelike. Like, did you have a preference between the two in the end? Is it just that you like switching between?
I think
kind of
we
messing
were
different
just
things?
looking as a palette cleanser between FTL. Justin can hop in afterward and tell me if I'm crazy in my memory. But there's a lot of, in many ways, Into the Breach is almost a response to FTL in terms of the design elements that we were exploring with FTL that we ended up worrying about or not liking very much. Like FTL does lean a lot more into randomness than Into the Breach does. There's a lot more die rolls just when it comes to evasion and stuff like that. But there's also a bigger swings. Every game you play in FTL is a lot more of that pulling the casino slot machine, and you might get a huge spike with an amazing setup, or you might never find a shop and die burning in flames. While Into the Breach, we spent a lot of time kind of normalizing out the randomness and seeing how much you can experiment in that roguelike structure and in a turn-based game that is a lot more like polished and designed down to its core. Like the squads are designed to be very, very self-sufficient without needing to find additional weapon drops. You have all the predicted attacks and all that stuff. Like we kind of are pulling the randomness out of everything and kind of seeing where it led us. But Justin, do you have thoughts on what it was moving between them?
we don't really usually approach games with like this is like the genre and type of game we want to make. Usually we kind of have like a goal of like an emotional state or like a feeling or something, and then we sort of just make the game that makes the most sense for that, and we just sort of stumble our way into genres and figuring out what works for us along the way. So I'm sure it was because we were sick of working on FTL, but it's not. I don't think it was like a conscious decision. Like,
yeah, that's fair. It was more of an influence on rather than like the driving factor on.
Yeah.
yeah.
That is really curious, that way of approaching games. What was like the core feeling of both the games, of FTL and Into the Breach?
FTL simply, captain of a starship. We want to feel like Adama or Picard or whatever. Into the Breach was more. Matt can correct me, but in my memory, it's just like a response to all the superhero movies where the city gets totally destroyed, and no one really seems to care, and they're like celebrating, "Yay, we did it!" And so we wanted this feeling of collateral damage mattering, like you accidentally destroy the building, and then you feel bad, or you're willing to sacrifice yourself to save the city. That was like the core conceit, although you did start with just like turn-based game, like let's do that as a start.
I started like just implementing a grid-based turn-based game with no real goal beyond that to begin with, and there's a different element of to carry on what Justin was saying, like in XCOM, which was definitely a huge influence on even wanting to go down that route to begin with, the Firaxis XCOM. You spend so much time hiding behind walls and kind of poking your head out that I was thinking about like how can you make a turn-based game that you're not specifically avoiding damage, that there's a motivation to step out in front of damage and say, like, I'm the hero and you shoot me, I should be your target, not that other poor civilian over there. And so part of it's a similar vibe to the stuff Justin was talking about, but it was a small gameplay moment that I wanted to be able to have in the bridge.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And it's also actually a question from Team Fizz about randomness, which you were talking about, kind of the response between FTL and Into the Breach. And so Team said how after Into the Breach, which is the most deterministic strategy game I've played, what value and use do you guys see in randomness for especially like turn-based non-card games? Like, do you feel like, you really think that people should be pushing harder on the taking out some of the randomness, or is that more just, it worked in your case? Like, what are kind of the thoughts you've ended up with there?
The funny part is we didn't really take out randomness so much as change the way it's presented and the way the player interacts with it. It's the you're given this random scenario of who's attacking who, and that's pure random. You have no control over what the enemy is doing. And what enemies spawn and that sort of thing. And then you have all your tools without any randomness to what happens from your own actions. They're like dice games on the tabletop side, where there's the type of dice game where you want to shoot someone, so you roll the dice and then you miss or hit, and you don't know what's going to happen before you roll the dice. And then there's the dice games where you roll the dice and you have 7 numbers in front of you, and you're going to place them to determine what your actions are going to be. And that feels less random in a way, because you get to work with the randomness handed to you instead of just that swing and a miss that you get, which is more the FTL style randomness. Well, Into the Breach is more the other type of randomness. I don't know if I did a great job explaining that, Justin.
Yeah. Input, output randomness or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah, and that level of visibility, and like we're back at UX again in some ways.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Can't escape it.
Yeah, it all comes back to UX, which is frankly fascinating for a roguelike topic, because I think that for better or worse, there's different opinions for sure in terms of how seriously roguelikes take UX. But I think there's a breadth between classic roguelikes, modern roguelikes, roguelites, all that. But...
Yeah, I kind of maybe one day would like to see like the classic roguelike with the best and the most clearest UI, and just be like, what would that game be? Like, I'm not sure.
Yeah. Interesting.
Just working hard to make Dwarf Fortress more user friendly, and it'll be interesting to see how well they can pull that off.
Yeah, that's a high goal. That's a hard task to undertake.
Yeah, I did user testing at university for NetHack for like a mod of it, and so I had to take random university students who'd never played anything and like get them to sit down and play NetHack, and like the cheat sheets were never enough. But yeah, there's a good question here from Nix, actually going back to what we were talking before about feedback and things, which was, how do you deal with the vocal critics on things like Reddit and Discord, particularly when it goes beyond criticism and ventures into being disrespectful? Just like, there's a lot of like popularity for your games, and so I'm sure that that's a line. You have any tips you use for kind of taking care of yourselves and finding that balance?
I'm not entirely sure how, but we did cultivate a fan base that is very largely respectful and positive, and so they kind of mediate everything for us. Like they like shift the dialogue to be more positive, and I'm not sure how we did that, because we didn't really do much of anything online. Like, we're largely quiet, and the way I personally deal with stuff like that is just simply not to look at it. I know that's a lot harder for other devs who really enjoy searching and reading about things, but personally, like, I don't even want to watch videos of people who love the game playing it, because I'm just like, oh man, they're just like going through my underwear drawer and like having a great time. But I'm very happy they like it. I just don't seek out to read and watch that stuff. So that's how my mental health tip is: never go online.
It's funny because FTL generated so much more vitriol than Into the Breach did, and I do wonder how much the games attract the audience, and the people who like Into the Breach tend to be less angry, or FTL was meaner, and so it pissed people off more. There are definitely more emails of like your final boss in FTL is horrible, but a lot more expletives in how they describe that. From my experience in terms of doing like customer support emails and the like, mostly your angriest person, if you will just respond nicely and explain things and remind them that there's a human on the other side, it could go shockingly well. But we do sit in a position that we don't talk to that many people. We're not nearly as public facing as like Twitter for like where it's constantly, and so we stand from a position of privilege that it's not as much of an issue, and so it's much easier to diffuse it even when it does come up.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Something of a lightning round. We got. I'm sorry for all the people leaving questions that we didn't have time for. This one's good because it'll be a really fast yes, no. Was the aesthetic of Into the Breach inspired by that one Captain Planet Flash game from the 2000s?
No, never heard of it.
No.
No idea. Yeah.
There's your answer, Tack. No.
I'll have to look it up.
What are you most proud of in FDL? That's a super short question, right?
Surviving the release.
That's fair. I'll leave Justin at that. I think.
Okay. All right. Yeah, that represents you both. What are your opinions on the modding scene for your games? I actually find it super interesting that there's a whole modding scene, especially for Into the Breach.
I mean, it's super, super cool, and we did not expect how much people would like modding FTL, and so we tried to make it much easier for Into the Breach. So it's I don't know. I love to see. I love people making something they like into something else they like. Like that's fun.
Yeah, it's not the sort of thing you could possibly be angry at or unhappy with in any way. It's your biggest fans want to continue screwing around with your design ideas is nothing but a compliment to this situation. I wish that we had more time to support and make better tools for them. But Justin and I, it's a struggle enough to get a game out the door, much less to have like a full modding suite for people to be able to poke at it. But it is generally on my mind as something I don't want to break when I put out updates. I don't want to make it impossible. And we hope that the scripting within the breach would make things easier.
Yeah. A fun question from the Witch Smart. Is there something that inspired the races and creatures in your games, or did they just appear in your dreams?
A lot of it came down to what can I draw.
Did you give Tom? We had all the races before we hired on the writer for FTL, right, Justin?
Yeah, and I think we're very practical. We're just like, what is a mechanic that would be good for a race, and then what would be something that is visually distinct that would suit that. And so we always go backwards.
Yeah, we're big fans of like the obvious when it comes to implementing a mechanic and then representing it. Who's the guy who has a lot of health? It'll be the guy who's a rock. Who's the guy that he adds power to a room? Well, that's an energy, obviously. And it's just like that's the extent.
Who wants to stab you? It's a praying mantis.
Yeah,
exactly.
Stabby guy. Yeah.
Yet again, comes back to UX. That it is a form of UX. That it makes it easier if you're not asking people to remember a weird alien name, or their background lore, or distinguishing the gray ones from the pink ones and what that means. If it's just like there's a big rock dude, you're pretty sure what he's going to do, and so you've solved a lot of like player introduction problems just by making obvious art and creature design. Yeah. And we tried to do a lot of similar stuff when it came to Into the Breach. They would drop the ball because we have dumb stuff like the scorpion shooting out webs and what was someone complained about recently? The mosquito is a squid, which doesn't make any sense.
Fair.
When that stuff came, I think that's a case of like Justin. I think you did do mosquito art at some point, right, Justin?
I did, and then gradually I couldn't draw that. Yeah.
And then we forgot to change the name, and now it's the mosquito is a squid.
Yeah.
So it's just entropy, basically.
Roll the dice.
It's the old warning with development that you should never put in placeholder that you don't expect to make it into the game, because it always will.
Yeah. I love that, coming back to UX again in the end of like, if you have an enemy that's good at stabbing, give them sword for hands. Excellent. Well, and that brings us exactly to time, which just flew by. So thank you so much for making it, especially with time zones involved. It's been really awesome having you. And yeah, if you have a chance to hang out in the social space at all, awesome. Or if other people want to go talk, the Rogue breakout room is the one that we have assigned for this particular talk. But yeah, thanks so much for coming out. This has been super fun.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah. All
What
right.
room do we go to if we want
Rogue.
to chat?
Rogue.
Rogue.
Yeah, like the OG.
Sorry if I missed that and you said it. I was distracted by the chat down here.
That was good. Yeah, so have fun, and we'll see you around.
Thank you.
Bye. Bye, everybody.
Cool. All right. Now we're going to go down to just me. There we go. All right. And that was our fireside chats. I hope that people enjoy them. I know I'm going to be enjoying trying to catch up in chat, since it turns out that it's pretty engaging to be talking to a bunch of super cool roguelike developers. But yeah, this was a cool format for us to try out. I hope that people enjoyed it. I feel like it was a fun thing to do for this kind of just free-form preview event. And the space is going to be open for another, I think, an hour and a half. We've got the schedule, which is time to just chat about the conversations that just happened, or just catch up with roguelike people you haven't seen in a while, explore the space. We have some new features we've been trying out, and like I've mentioned before, if you have any feedback or if you find any issues in the central hall, we have a note wall that you can leave those notes on, which we super appreciate. Gives us some time to do what we can with that before the main event, which again, I will plug that the main event is happening the end of October. Go to roguelike.club for more information. Pick up a ticket so you can get the reminder. And check out, we have shared our speaker list for the event. It's super exciting. We'll be following up bios for the speakers and talk descriptions soon. And yeah, we hope to see everyone there. And I think that is that. So have a fantastic time. Thank you for having me and the rest of our lovely speakers. And I will see you in the social space, and hopefully see you again in a couple months. 1 month. 1 month. Time's fake. All right. Have a good evening, folks, or morning.